What we're going to do is today is we're going to ask each of our speakers to give us some thoughts around infrastructure. And when you talk about infrastructure, gosh, how broad, how deep, as a sort of a terminology of what we're talking about. So what we thought we'd do, and as we say, we're talking about, does South Australia have the infrastructure currently? Ports, roads, broadband, and a whole heap of other things to help business thrive. South Australia, you'd like to think that the economy is on the way up, but how do we support that growth? How do we support that growth, and not only in metro, but also in regional areas? Are we currently making the right choices in the terms of the supports that we're doing in infrastructure? So today we're going to do this slightly differently, and we're asking if each of our speakers can address that. And to start with the Minister, when you look at infrastructure and what we've got happening in Adelaide, in South Australia, where are we, and are we on the right track? And I reckon you'll probably say yes.
Well, I would say that now, yeah, sure. But can I say that there's been a bipartisan consensus for investing in infrastructure for a long period of time, and I think that that's a very healthy thing. And you'll notice it when projects are announced, that all stripes of government, state, federal, blue, red, if everybody takes credit for the project, you know that you're onto a winner. And I say that in full view of our now permanent CE of Infrastructure South Australia, Jeremy Conway, who was stolen from my department to go and run ISA, but as the new guy who'll make sure that we are delivering the right projects. But there has been a huge level of investment both in the first Marshall government budget last year, but also in the federal budget this year, for new infrastructure, a lot of it in roads, but all of that is designed around supporting the productive capacity of our economy. And there's a number of ways that manifests itself, not only getting trucks from A to B quicker and getting larger tracks from A to B quicker, it is also about the jobs pipeline that civil construction delivers. And you'll see in this year's state budget our desire to deliver a very long-term pipeline of infrastructure projects that give certainty to businesses to hang around here.
Minister,
and build
can I
things.
ask you, a surprising result for some people on Saturday night, has that changed or galvanised the thoughts that you have around local infrastructure works? What does that now look like, that we've got a surprise Liberal government back in office? How is that going to work in South Australia's favour?
Well, the good thing is we don't have to worry about some of the $2.6 billion that was given to us in the federal budget being taken away. And there was a risk of that. Now a risk we don't have to worry about. But having spoken to the Deputy Prime Minister this week, his message to us now was, as quick as you can build it, will be as quick as we can give you the money to do it. So that gives us the freedom to really roll this pipeline out in a way that suits South Australians. And that's very, very it's a very good news for South Australia that we are going to be able to get on and deliver that. And I think the other real key benefit from Saturday night is that we don't have to worry about the housing market taking a dive. So two very positive things for South Australia in the short and medium term.
And so when you talk about South Australian priorities, I'm always interested to know of the thousands of things that need to be done. How does the government prioritise, and what are the parameters around how you prioritise infrastructure works?
Extremely complex, and again, Infrastructure South Australia will help us to wade through that. But essentially we took the approach in last year's budget and will again in this year's budget that we're keen to invest and we're willing to put real dollars on the table. There are a whole series of competing priorities around pipeline, workforce development, maximising local content, through to budget impacts. But in terms of the project selection, we're at a stage in infrastructure development in the world where there is a lot of change. There's a lot of new technology coming on board, especially in public transport. And so we, at this stage, waiting for batteries to improve, waiting for trackless trams to actually be a thing that works, waiting for electric vehicles to mature. The best thing that we can do at the moment is take a technology neutral approach, and that's manifest itself at the moment in investing in roads, because we know that roads are going to be a medium by which a lot of new technology will continue to use. We don't want to be a first mover. We were a first mover in regards to renewables, and I think we've paid the price for that. But there is very good advantage in us being a very fast follower. Let somebody else make the expensive mistakes, let's learn from them, and let's be quick to implement on that.
I have to ask you, you talk about expensive mistakes, and when we talk about infrastructure, you've had a hammering over the last few weeks about some roadworks.
Sure.
Does that give the South Australian public the confidence to think that, I mean, obviously you're not out there digging the trenches, but in terms of the contractors that you're choosing and the oversight of those contractors, you'd have to say that's been a bit of a stuff-up.
Well, yeah, it's a stuff-up. You don't want to see it happen, and we're getting to the bottom of it right now, but it hasn't cost taxpayers any money, and this will be fixed. But can I say that it doesn't diminish South Australians' desire to see better infrastructure built, and I think the South Australians are smart enough to realise that mistakes can happen. It's about how we deal with them, fix them and move on, and anybody that's built a house or renovated a house or made an extension to their business premises will know that building's difficult and comes with a lot of complexity. I think once the road's open, people are going to appreciate it for the productive benefit that it's going to deliver.
Yeah. And you certainly didn't need to give Mr Malinowskis a free kick, because he's given you a hell of a hiding over it.
That's politics.
It is indeed. To move now to Claire, the Mayor of Port Adelaide Enfield. Port Adelaide is one of those areas that really is burgeoning. It seems it's finally hit its time. For a long time we've heard so much about the next boom coming to Port Adelaide, and property investors have watched property prices down there. But given the shipbuilding that we've got coming in, the extra people that are expected to come in, how is Port Adelaide Enfield placed in terms of infrastructure at the moment?
Yeah, you're right. We're actually really excited about the money, $90 billion that's coming in with the shipbuilding project. So at the moment we haven't actually seen what that's going to do for our city, as well as the wider cities as well. It's not just going to be focused for Port Adelaide Enfield. We don't know what it's going to look like, but we're really excited by the potential in terms of setting up small businesses in the area as well, and sort of piggybacking on the Lot 14 site and hoping that we'll also be able to have some small businesses in the supply chain coming in and finding a home in Port Adelaide.
So tell me, it seems Port Adelaide, respectfully, has been out of the limelight for quite some time, and all of those people who hopefully bought warehouses and invested in them and hung on to them. So what are you doing to gear up for this expected growth?
So we've got a couple of staff members who are absolute guns. Our economic team, development team are absolutely fantastic, and they're out there networking with businesses, making sure that they're supporting businesses who might be interested in coming into the area, as well as those who are already there, and seeing the potential for setting up base in Port Adelaide Enfield Council, which is really close and part of what's happening with the Osborne precinct out there. We're also seeing that there's so much land that's being opened up by the state government with the land packages all throughout our city. We've currently got 126,000 people, living in Port Adelaide Enfield, and we're just seeing that the potential with the new developments that are happening will be fantastic as well.
So are you geared in terms of the existing infrastructure for that sort of growth, or what do you need? It's a bit chicken and egg, I suppose.
Yeah.
You know, what do you need to be able to support, say, an extra 50,000 people within that area?
Yeah, that's right. We know that we haven't got a good enough network in terms of the internet systems, so that's something that we're aware of, and we're working towards setting up a better system for that. Without a good system in place, we will struggle to be able to have business to come into the area, but that's also part of the team and what they're doing in that space. I think it is also the chicken and egg as well, because of the housing developments that are occurring. It's attracting people to the area, but they also know that they need the housing to be able to set up home in terms of a workplace, because Adelaide's such a livable city, and if they're having to move and drive an hour to get to work, then that's not really the sort of environment that Adelaide is known to be.
Absolutely. Nikki, can I ask you, you're obviously Chair of Business SA, but a diligent owner and hard worker of a small business, Star of Greece. If you haven't been there, get down there, it's fabulous.
Thank you.
So talking about small businesses, of which, as we know, that are the backbone of the Australian economy, what do small businesses need in terms of infrastructure?
Sure. I mean, I think that the reality is with infrastructure, it's such a broad topic.
Yeah.
So most people sort of identify with infrastructure, and some of these have been touched on: roads, rail, it could be hospitals, it could be education, it could be bridges. That sort of major infrastructure piece. And obviously, we encourage as Business SA a good infrastructure program that enables businesses to grow and prosper. The reality is, I mean, 98% of businesses are SMEs in this state. So infrastructure in all its forms is important for that growth, for us to see that 3% growth that we're looking at, as has been identified in the Joyce report. So in terms of businesses themselves, you know, I guess my focus in some senses today, given the other people on the panel, is around that IT infrastructure.
Yeah.
So hardware, software, applications, integration. We've got old systems, we've got new technology. How can you continually be trying to reinvent yourself? How can you make improvements that can make the business more sustainable, save time, make money? And then, of course, there is the digital infrastructure, which, you know, NBN, 5G, Gig City, and what that actually can provide in terms of benefits for businesses. So it is really broad, but certainly as a small business owner, the things that we need to be thinking about is very much in simplistic terms, from what hardware are we using, what software, how can we enable our business to work more effectively, how can we save time, save money, how can we be more accurate with programs such as staff rostering and moving away from traditional timesheets. And they present a whole lot of other challenges in being in your own business.
So, from a small business, one of the things that I would say, I just find it A, confusing, and B, bloody expensive. And clearly it's constantly evolving. What sort of support do you think small businesses need?
Certainly, I think an organisation like Business SA, I mean, we undertake a lot of training, we do a lot of programs for members, and apart from the Star of Greece, Business SA has membership. You can go to business-sa.com for membership and to understand those support services, which is really important, and we can help businesses in those areas which can be overwhelming. If I look at the Star of Greece as an example, and I'm in business with my husband, and sometimes we don't see eye to eye with a number of things, and we are making improvements in those areas. I feel like I'm in a counselling session. But if I can just give you an example of some sort of technology challenges that we looked at. If you recall, if you go into a restaurant, you'd see that old bookings book that people would go with. So what's not sensible about that is that you're not capturing any of the data from the customers that you're using. You're then having to make phone calls to make reconfirmations. You've got inaccuracies that actually can occur. So we moved to an online booking system around about 4 years ago, and we signed up with the brightest, newest organisation who we thought was going to be great. And of course, looking around 18 months ago, we were going to be paying $12,000 to that organisation for the benefit of having that service, and the competitors that were around now that had come into the market were around $2,000. So I think there's also a real risk in ensuring that if you are going to be taking on apps or software, being really careful and knowing that technology changes so quickly that we really need to be able to respond to that. And I think that's where it could be your own industry organisation, or it could be us, can actually kind of help you with advice around what other businesses in your same industry are using and what might make sense.
Yeah. Mark, can I ask you, I know we've caught you in transit on way to a speaking engagement, and welcome to Australia, by the way. For the audience, can you tell us a bit about Smart Cities Lab?
Sure. Real quick, it's a city-facing nonprofit.
Yeah.
So all I do is work with cities. I don't consult, I don't do any of the other work. And the 20 cities that I work with, we work, when we define infrastructure, right? I worked at the Department of Transportation, worked for Secretary of Transportation for 2 years. And I understand infrastructure, I understand hard infrastructure, but in order to, I think, look at things the way things are going to be in the future state, as opposed to where we are now, you have to think of infrastructure differently. And so I work with the cities to try to get them to understand who they are. It's really important. So your sister city is Austin.
Yep.
I work very closely with Austin.
Okay.
They're very close to losing who they are. They are a city with a very distinct DNA, and because of the way things are moving and the growth that they're going through, they're losing who they are. And how do they work within that infrastructure, or cities like them, like Denver and Portland and San Francisco and Pittsburgh and other cities that are experiencing transition, which sounds like where you guys are going, right? You're in a transition, you're excited. Like, I've only been here for 24 hours, but the amount of excitement and hope around where you guys are going to, I would caution you to focus on the things that, so Smart Cities Lab came out, and rather than do the typical arrogant thing you do when you come out of DC, you tell everybody what they should be doing.
Yeah.
Instead, I took 7 months and did an assessment where I sat down. I spent 2 to 3 weeks in each city, interviewing at the mayor's behest, the different, probably about 30 or some odd interviews in each city. And of those 20 cities, and they were very disparate cities. They could be cities like Detroit that are devolving, right? And they're trying to figure out who they are. Or cities like San Francisco that are broken. Or cities like Austin, Denver, and Portland are growing too fast. And every single city, the number one issue was affordability.
Yeah.
And that's a fascinating thing because, you know, you wouldn't think affordability would be an issue in Detroit, right? But affordability. Second one is displacement, also known as gentrification. The third one is access to critical services.
So when you say displacement, you're talking about, and I'd look at Port Adelaide, so
Right.
the yuppies moving into that which might have been a working class area before.
So the people who are there call it colonization,
Yep.
which is a tough term, right? But really what it happens is that we call it gentrification because, you know, it's a nicer term,
Yeah.
right? My neighborhood gentrified, which means but displacement is a whole different
Absolutely.
thing. As you're pushing people out who no longer can meet the living wage in the space that there is because it's no longer affordable. So displacement and affordability are cousins.
Yep.
And then access to critical services. And so all of a sudden, the people have to move to places where they no longer have access to the critical service like job training, medical services, jobs, stuff like that. So to me, infrastructure, and by the way, the fourth one, which I think is relevant to you guys, is regionalization. You know, as you work through your whole region, how do you make sure that all boats rise, right? So my favorite stat on that is Oakland, California, and if anybody's old enough to know who Oakland, California is, it's the 4th most expensive city in the United States now. And that's because it's in the Bay Area right next to San Francisco. So what the ills that hit San Francisco are now hitting Oakland. So you can't escape if you're in the region. It's going to hit you. It's going to approach.
There's going to be that ripple.
Right, and so a lot of cities are in a urban, suburban, rural stack, which I think is true for you guys also. And so you have to make sure that when you work through these issues, that you consider all three of those areas of. And then the fifth one was congestion, which I don't think you guys suffer from because I had Rasa complaining. By the way, I wanted to first thank I forgot I was being impolite. Thank you, Mayor. And I also want to thank Rasa, who's been incredibly hospitable, and it's great to be here in your city, by the way.
So let me ask you, and this is no doubt an incredibly stupid question, but when you think of infrastructure, how do you describe it? Because it goes beyond roads and rail. What does infrastructure in 2019 look like?
Right. So the commercial side of things, right? The companies, the tech companies, the mobility companies, the infrastructure companies will sell you on what is the future state.
Yeah.
Automated vehicles are going to be whipping around your street. You know, all your lighting systems should have this, that, and the other thing. You should and they sell you on all the things you're supposed to have. And that's not where that's not where they work. They work in solving today's problems.
Yeah.
So the infrastructure has to be a combination of both anticipating what the future is going to be and making sure you have that digital infrastructure, making sure you have the ability to understand how to plan for that, and then how to spend the money. And I'm going to be a little controversial and challenge your minister for a second. Fast follower is an understandable place to be. And that is a reasonable space to be because you don't want to be, you're not allowed to fail in government. It's just not allowed. But I would suggest that you pick certain spaces to incubate new ideas and be a leader in some spaces where the impact won't be so great. So that way you allow places like Adelaide to be an incubator of some of these ideas, and you then can lead instead of follow on those.
Sure, and there are examples of that. I mean, I was talking specific, I suppose, about public transport infrastructure where you're making 50 and 100-year decisions.
Right.
But can I tell you that our transport infrastructure network is actually very intelligent, and we actually do something here in South Australia. And in fact, I don't want to keep pointing to Jeremy, but he's the guy that was running it before he left. In South Australia, we actually have a network of Bluetooth sensors right across Adelaide that live tracks where our traffic is and provides that information through to a free app that can actually be used to tell people what oncoming traffic hazards are ahead. And I know there are various versions of it. But we've been partnering with a local company, Sage Automation, who make the sensors to provide this information. It's actually something that's reasonably unique to South Australia, that was born out of a conversation between a traffic engineer and some people from the Traffic Management Centre, and something we've actually licensed to other cities around the world, and an idea that needs to go further. We're actually in the process of updating that technology. But what I find most interesting about transport innovation is a lot of it you don't see. So, for instance, train capacity has massively increased because of now intelligent sort of transport systems. We see the fact that first mile, last mile is being revolutionised, and whether that be autonomous vehicle, e-scooter, or whatever else, is completely changing. And a lot of the intelligence behind that isn't sort of aware to the naked eye. For instance, there's actually live algorithmic updating of traffic sequencing across 800 different intersections across our city. And again, all of those things people wouldn't see. We're actually pretty good at it. And an instance where we believe, as you say, we can take a lead, but especially on digital, you can take that lead in a way that doesn't invest billions in hard infrastructure that is immovable afterwards. And so we definitely think there's a way to innovate, but when you're making a big play, for instance, about which mode of public transport is going to win the battle for the next 50 years, I think that's a different equation.
Minister, can I ask you, it's interesting, so we talk about autonomous vehicles, and it's been really interesting because I think they came out of the sort of the idea, thought bubble, but there's been a real reluctance by Australians to grasp it. I think Australians like to drive a car, and I think within a confined area where you're on a train that will take you somewhere. So I would argue that that's still some way off. But if we look at something in the here and now, like heavy vehicle transport, why have we not managed to get some sort of ring route outside of the Adelaide CBD rather than having all of those heavy vehicles up and down Portrush Road, for example? Is that not a pressing priority?
Certainly is, and one we're looking at right at this moment. It's an idea we took to the last election of rerouting road and rail freight around Adelaide rather than through Adelaide. That's something I'll be getting a report on in the next couple of months, as well as what we do on the north-south corridor and whether we tunnel or not tunnel. But can I say, in regards to autonomous vehicles, and I say that with Professor Rocco Zito in the room, wherever I saw him, South Australia's preeminent expert on autonomous vehicles, the community and governments, I actually think, are ahead of the vehicle manufacturers. And
How so?
Well, we had a conference here last year in October, and the feedback I got from the OEMs was that they want not to have handouts and trials, that race has been done, but they want commercial use case.
Yeah.
And I said, well, fine, tell me where I can operate your vehicles without a chaperone. And the answer was, well, we're not ready to do it on a public road. We really need it to be a fixed route. So if we could find a dedicated point-to-point corridor where we could set up something that's very strict, we could work towards not having someone drive the vehicle, which is the holy grail. Otherwise, you're right, you may as well be driving the vehicle. And in fact, it's the technology and the risk that technology providers are willing to take that at the moment, and especially in South Australia, is the rate limiter. But we as a government are raring to go because, and I think that this is where autonomous vehicles will take their cue, is anywhere where somebody's being paid to drive something provides that financial incentive. And once the technology catches up and everybody's risk profile is made equal, we'll actually see the technology take off.
So realistically, what sort of time frame do you see for the tangible implementation of autonomous vehicles?
Well, there's two ways to do it. There's the part where you make the existing vehicle incrementally more autonomous, and we see that all the time with lane assist and cruise control, adaptive cruise control on these things. And then there's people coming at it from the other side, which is we're just going to develop the technology to create a fully autonomous vehicle over here instead of being incremental. That incremental work will continue. More and more, that sort of holy grail of sort of a fully autonomous vehicle is still quite a ways away, and it's actually got a lot to do with enabling technology and something very basic. If you're out in the country, you can rely on LiDAR sensors and inbuilt things to the vehicle to get yourself around. But we know, for instance, in cities where you need to be able to see around corners and see through buildings, where there's a different sort of connected technology which requires huge data capacity. That could be a real rate limiter, and the fact that that system can't fail. The other point that I'd make is that it seems to me that new technology is held to a higher standard than existing technology. And I'll give you an example of e-scooters. Feedback initially from the community and a couple of pesky upper house MLCs who say that nobody can get hurt on an e-scooter, and if somebody gets hurt, we should get rid of them. And that, pedestrians are at risk.
And the punters love them.
But at the moment, pedestrians are being killed by cars, but nobody's saying take the car off the road. And it's the acceptance of risk by all parties is really something that we need to progress, which is why we do these autonomous vehicle trials at the moment. But the answer is, if we were to put AVs on the road in a more rapid fashion, we would see a marked reduction, up to 90% reduction in fatalities and serious injury. But people want 100%. And from a technology manufacturer's point of view, they want to deliver that 100%.
Yeah.
And that's where I suppose we as a society need to mature.
Yeah.
Can I just comment on that?
Sure.
Just, the difficulty both with the scooter technology and the AV technology is it's not developed yet. And if I'm a pedestrian and there's a car hits me, that's a fully developed technology. There are consequences, there are laws, there's regulation. And AV, there's not laws, regulation, and it's not regulated. At least in the United States, it's not.
No.
And scooters are not regulated. And so trying to figure out how the technology interacts with the current place is really, really important piece. And so we did, with the cities, we had the CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control in the United States. They sent out epidemiologists to study this exact thing because they don't understand what the incidence of injury is. They're not wearing helmets. They're jumping curbs. If you go to some American cities right now, it's full crazy town.
Really?
I know, crazier than normal. But because you have scooters going everywhere, and so to me, it's not just the people on the scooter; it's the people that interact with the scooter too. So as you evolve technologies, you have to figure out ways to do it. I think it's extremely telling that the OEs talked to you and said they want a very controlled space in which to test it out. That should be very telling.
I think there's a real difference, and not that we're here to talk about autonomous vehicles, but autonomous vehicles, for me, I feel like I'm sitting in a can with no steering wheel. For people who jump on those cycles, there's still an element of control. So I think the element of control and trust is the real stumbling block for some of the technology.
Except that aeroplanes run on autopilot.
Yeah, but there's a bloke up the front.
Yeah, sure. But there are also now train systems. I think there's only a few in the world that are also.
Or a lady, sorry. Yes.
Also autonomous. But and I certainly accept the point. With e-scooters, the approach we took here in South Australia, knowing that, is we said yes very quickly, but we said yes very cautiously. So we took a very some would say heavy-handed regulatory approach to keep the speed limit lower, only over 18s, treat it as a vehicle for the purpose of drink driving and those kinds of things. And we've actually seen a very good level of acceptance in the community, and to the point where, as we go forward, we may be able to gently relax some of those restrictions, having taken a very cautious approach.
But I would suggest it was gimmicky to start with. There were scooters on every corner. There were all sorts of shapes of people on the scooters. So, we've all seen them. So it was a gimmick, but in terms of long-term usability and sustainability, I do wonder where that sits. Claire, let me come to you, not that because you look fabulous on an e-scooter, just saying.
Oh, thank you.
But in terms of Port Adelaide, what are some of the infrastructure requirements that you can see that you're going to need in the next, say, 5 years?
So we're having the Northern Connector Road, which is almost at completion actually, which will be fantastic.
Yeah.
The dredging project that Flinders Ports have underway at the moment will mean that we can have some much larger vessels coming in and being able to turn around to get out again, which I'm sure will assist with the shipbuilding project as well. So widening up the channel will be able to mean that we have a lot more importing and exporting occurring within the port, because our inner port, for those who haven't been in the Port Adelaide area for a while, isn't actually an active port in terms of that. It's all happening out at the outer port. So we're now trying to activate the inner port in other ways, because there's such a great heritage precinct that we can really liven up there too. So Northern Connector, the dredging project, and we know that There'll be a few internal road infrastructure adjustments that we will need to make, but they're sort of hard to be able to judge at this point in time, but we'll absolutely need to look at the ways that we can come up with some master plans on the roading system. Because autonomous cars aren't there yet and our public transport isn't at the point that we can actually completely rely on that system at this point in time as well. We've also got a little rail spur line and a bus interchange coming into the centre of the port, which is something that we've been missing. And that will really liven up the space as well as encourage people to start using rail
So would
in a new
you
way.
potentially be looking for an extension of the tram down past the entertainment centre to keep going right down
Funny
Port
you
Road?
should say that. That's something that we've been trying, not quite the tram, but looking for a much better public transport system out to the port and the outer harbour.
Yeah.
There's so much going on and we know it's going to be there for such a long time. We think there could be a whole lot of work in that space, but it's a big project and we're really aware of the fact that the financial commitment that all levels of government would need to make are quite significant for that.
But you can certainly ask.
Well, we can, and we have been asking, but no one's been saying yes. But we'll keep asking because we do think
Well,
it's a
he's
really
right there.
important part. Well, yes, but you know, Stefan's doing a whole lot of other things for us as well, so we like to thank him for that.
Nikki, for you, talking about small businesses, do we need a complete overhaul of what we've got? I'm really interested about how we blend the old and the new and how we manage that. What would you say from Business SA's point of view? How do you help businesses get through that?
Oh, look, and I think, you know, many people here would remember the old computer room that you would go into and it's got all the data banks and it's got all of those things. And obviously that's changed as we've moved into a cloud-based environment. And, I mean, Business SA ourselves, we've made the transition into that. And, I mean, obviously there are different software that you can use to enable you to do that and a lot of other considerations around that particular space. And the considerations don't just stop there in terms of how you store your data. The reality is that employees these days are demanding anywhere, anytime access to company data. And of course that provides a lot of security issues for businesses in making sure that you are protected from viruses. So at Business SA, in terms of we've used Microsoft Azure, we've transformed our platform, moved all of that into the cloud, and we've set up certain protocols for staff to be able to access company data. We've moved from a desktop environment to transitioning into laptops. We're limiting, in some instances, the access for staff to that company data to try and protect that. But you've got to enable those systems. I mean, I know myself at our restaurant, if we don't enable our staff to access company data, access the emails remotely, then they will find a way to do it themselves. So it is really important that you are taking control of that, looking at what systems can enable you to do that, making sure that you've got security and protocols in place to give that access, but also to make sure you're protecting that data. It's a really important factor.
Can I ask you, human capital? We talk about, when we talk about infrastructure, it's roads and rail and, hard things that you can see and do. But what about the sort of the human infrastructure, I suppose, about creating the next generation? We've got Lot 14 here in Adelaide, which there's been a lot of noise about, and it's all about helping to facilitate entrepreneurs and give them the embryonic start.
Right.
Tell me your thoughts about human capital.
So part of what I'm going to talk about in Melbourne is the documentary called Human Scale, which was Jan Giel, and he talked about how our cities should change and how we should design. And as you go through and figure out what infrastructure you need, as you go through, try to figure out how is Adelaide going to change with that, focusing on the human scale aspect is a critical part of how you do this. As you go through and redesign the port, as you go through and try to figure out how do you bring in new technologies? Because they're all coming, by the way. There are different cities that are currently testing out the drone delivery of goods, and it's all coming to us, and we're just going to get buffeted and moved every single time if we don't do community engagement, if we don't provide spaces where people who don't like to drive in cars can still exist and get around, if we don't provide easy access to people who can have childcare and have all the things that make life worth living, as long as they can stay in that space. So you can't just sit there and focus on the technology, data, innovation. Those are tools. Your main job as to govern is in the interim state. That future state is where we're heading. the interim state is where you really need to focus.
Because there are some people who would say, look, you build it, they will come. But there's a bit of a quantum leap, isn't there not?
Yeah, there is. And look, almost every city that I know of is trying to do exactly what you guys are doing and trying to attract the startups, trying to attract the innovation capital and stuff like that. But it is again, going to the problem you're trying to solve. What is the problem you're trying to solve? Why are you trying to what is the purpose of Lot 14?
Yeah.
And what is the problem it's trying to solve? Because if you just focus on what it is and the shiny piece, I can give you probably 10 examples of cities who have built a similar type of thing and nobody comes.
Minister, you're probably the right person to ask. Why have we built Lot 14? What is the problem we're trying to solve?
Well, really, at its core, it's an effort in clustering and collaboration. It's the idea that if you bring businesses of a like mind together, and we're talking here about obviously strong scientific disciplines, the Centre for Machine Learning out of Adelaide University, together with sort of startup IT businesses. You've got Australia Space Agency being held there, but also there are cultural elements with the Aboriginal Art and Cultures Gallery, which is all designed to try and foster collaboration between different disciplines that helps to be more than just a sum of its parts. And we think that that's extremely important. It's also, it's about us trying to inspire young people to stay here, which we know for cities like ours, Mark, we've got an issue that we've got net interstate migration, and there are jobs here, there are opportunities here. It's about inspiring young people to see that. And that's where the value of the Space Agency, which is only $40 million over 4 years, the real value is in the fact that it inspires a group of young people to see space and defence as future career opportunities, and the jobs are here for them. As Claire points out, there's $90 billion worth of shipbuilding coming, so that part's extremely exciting. And on that front, we are seeing already some early benefits where in the sort of 2017 year, 6,500 people leave South Australia net.
Yeah.
Last year, that's down to 4,300. So still in negative territory, but a good example of how keeping young people here is going to stimulate growth, and we're leading off the back of places like Tasmania and New Zealand, which really have addressed that net interstate migration deficit as a way to stimulate their economies and really encourage greater entrepreneurship.
It's interesting because there's been a lot of headlines around Lot 14 and a lot of excitement and a lot of expectation. Do you have a concern that, and I've had this conversation with others before, there is a danger in being seen to, a failure to launch, that you're going to need to deliver something and to explain to the public of whatever political persuasion what the timing of that might be? Is this a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan?
Well, can I tell you, we could build all the buildings and fill the space very easily, very easily. And there's large large blue chip businesses that would love to stick office towers behind there and fill it up. We've resisted that because we want to curate, to create that cluster. That's where the real benefit of government being involved is. And that is a slightly longer term project. But having said that, and this is, Lot 14 is the Premier's baby, and he looks after that thing on a daily basis, but it is going extremely well. It will be successful even off the back of what's already been secured for there. The challenge for us is to get the absolute maximum benefit out of that, to make it more than just sort of a place where white-collar jobs go, for it to actually have that curated collaboration piece.
Can I ask you on something arguably less esoteric? Public transport, when we're talking infrastructure in South Australia. Public transport here really seems to struggle in terms of, I spend a lot of time working out of Melbourne, and a train goes past and there's at least 6 carriages. I pull up at a crossing here and there's 1 carriage, and I think, gee, where did that go? So in terms of public transport, how do you approach meeting the needs? Clearly, you're not getting the patronage, and you're not getting the patronage because one would argue there's not necessarily the service. How do you handle the conundrum, which is currently public transport?
Sure, and the answer to that is we haven't got a great system. We've got one of the lowest, equal lowest patronage in the country, the lowest level of integration in the country, and declining patronage overall. Part of that, we don't accept this as an argument for defeat, is that our road network is better than comparable cities. It is still easy to get around Adelaide. We're continuing to invest in roads because we don't want to lose that competitive lifestyle advantage. But really, it's about us making the service as attractive as possible, and that's not necessarily just about augmentation, although I take Claire's Port Rouse example as one. We are investing a whole heap in public transport at the moment, electrifying the Gawler line, extending the Tonsley Trains line out to Flinders, park and rides along the Oban, as well as a potential extension of the Oban out to Golden Grove. There are a lot of moving parts at the moment that we can use to increase frequency, but the real answer, we believe at the moment, is that we actually have antiquated technology, which makes it much more difficult to engage with public transport, and especially when...
Is it not just about, does it have to be that complicated? Is it not just about not having buses and trains going to the right spots where population is growing?
No, I mean, there is coverage for the service. It's about making the service attractive enough that it becomes a preferred option over taking your car. And that is a very complex equation, but it doesn't always have to be about hard infrastructure. It's about digital infrastructure. It's about the customer service experience. It's about things like safety. And so something as simple as making sure that train stations are secure and well lit can drive patronage growth. And there are a lot of factors that go into it, and the chief executive that we recruited comes from running Australia's largest public transport network in Sydney, and there is a clear path to improve patronage even in a car-friendly city like Adelaide. And I think as we see over the next 12 to 18 months that strategy roll out, we will be able to make positive gains.
Sorry, Nikki?
Just a question around, I mean, living in McLaren Vale, the other great wine growing area in the state. One of the challenges that we see as a business is, and it's around this sort of last mile. So somebody takes a train they can get as far as Seaford, but for them to get around McLaren Vale, it's hopeless. There's not public transport, there's no Uber. And we look at this as a region as to how we can solve it, and we're certainly not going to do it on our own. But what do you think the best approach is to try and find ways where visitors, we say, come to Barossa, come to McLaren Vale, how can we provide public transport needs when even the early disruptors like Uber aren't available and the public transport system isn't available?
Well, actually, we're working. Uber's actually not allowed to operate in regional South Australia as yet. That's something we're actually working on right at this moment.
Why are they not allowed to operate in regional South Australia? What's the logic?
Different regulations. It's just red tape that
Why?
needs to be fixed. It gets complicated because.
But a car ride's a car ride, surely.
Sure, but it's about enforcement of the existing regulations, and we've got the ability to enforce that in Adelaide. In metropolitan South Australia, it's a different enforcement regime, but we're essentially working on it right at this moment to unlock that, because we do think it's an answer, because public transport relies on sort of density and patronage levels that can make it efficient. Technology means that we can change and really better utilise that cost structure rather than just a heavy fixed route that only does one thing. The ability to make the service flexible, use technology to make it responsive, can actually make it work in better and smaller locations. And one technology we're trialling at the moment around on-demand transport, which we've got a tender for out at the moment, we actually believe could be a solution not for high-frequency areas, but for low-frequency areas where the service is so poor that you just don't engage with it. Whereas if we could use technology to get it to your door, take you where you want to go, not necessarily on a traditional timetable, but on one that works for you, we think is a great unlocker. There's actually quite a lot that's going to happen in the regional space over the next year.
Because we know there's drivers, we know people want to drive a car.
Absolutely.
So that's the other side, is that people want a job and they want to work within that area. But at the moment with Uber, as you may know, if you want to take a job, the driver doesn't know where they're going until you've arrived and picked you up, unlike a taxi. So they don't reject the 2-minute trip. So there's a big advantage to it. What it means is that anybody that wants to live in Barossa or live in Fleurieu can't actually live and operate the Uber, even though the demand may be there. So I really hope that is something that's being considered.
It's the job of government to just make sure that we have a facilitative enabling environment to allow private operators or more innovative public operators to get in there.
Yeah.
Can I have it back now?
Thank you.
Thank you. Minister, just a question. In terms of infrastructure, who needs to pay? And who should pay given the changing demands? Should it be a government responsibility? Could it be the opportunity for a PPP? You know, are we looking, should it be the private sector, should it be the public sector? When it comes to paying the bills, given what we need, who pays it?
Well, I think that the public purse is always going to subsidise, well, not always, but for the foreseeable future is going to subsidise public transport. And it's because as much as there is a private benefit, and for the record in South Australia, only about 20 cents out of every dollar of providing the service comes from the fare box. The rest is by government. But there are a handful of systems around the world that make money, and most of the time they make money because they've got expensive buildings that they lease as part of the infrastructure rather than from the service itself. So I accept that there's always going to be a high degree of injection of public funds, but there is a public benefit in the fact that you're reducing congestion on existing road infrastructure.
But we don't have congestion in Adelaide. I mean, seriously.
It's all relative. As somebody who has to drive Port Wakefield Road on a daily basis, I can tell you that
we'll get the big trucks off and then it'll be a whole lot better.
Well, that's why we're building the Northern Connector, which will be open at the end of the year. But the answer is there's always going to be public funding into public transport. It's because there is a social good that comes with alongside that private good. It's also about money displacement. If we didn't have a public transport system, that's about 60,000 trips a year that'd be on a road, and we'd need to be spending the money on the roads. So there is a balance there, and there is always going to be a role for government until the whole system's disrupted again.
So for Port Adelaide and Enfield, if you had a wish list for infrastructure that you could have the good minister deliver for you in the next week or so, what would be on the top of your wish list?
Well, we're pretty happy so far, just got to put the disclaimer in there, but we would absolutely love to have a better public transport system heading out toward the end of the peninsula, but we're also aware of the high costs, and I don't think it's a state government responsibility alone. I think this is a much bigger scale thing, considering the fact that the money is being invested by federal government at the end of our peninsula, and already there is quite a lot of heavy transport operating on that road. But not only the defence project occurring now, there's also the dredging will increase the truck flow. It's bound to happen. So we do need to do a bit of work in that space. But also I think it's a mindset from us as people who live in Adelaide. We know we can just get in the car and go somewhere. We don't actually rely on public transport. So something that we're really talking to the people who live within Port Adelaide Enfield about is we can jump on a bike. We don't have to have a car park straight out the front of the place that we work, because we've become quite familiar with the ability to be able to park somewhere close and rely on our cars and road system, and we need to be putting in better footpaths and bike lane infrastructure as well, because I don't think it's just the public transport. I think we really need to, as people who live within Adelaide, start realising this is going to get busier, and we need to start changing our mindsets as well.
Absolutely. Nikki, what about for you as an infrastructure wish list? What would be on yours?
Oh, certainly. I mean, if I talk about living down south and I chair the Southern Adelaide Economic Development Board, I mean, we've got the duplication of Main South Road, which is at this point is going as far as Selix. There's certainly some black spots there. There is some demand from the Yankalilla Council to extend that from McLaren Vale and really make some duplication and some improvements from that perspective. The rail that goes to Seaford, we'd like to see that going to Aldinga. I'll start with those. They're certainly major infrastructure projects. Look, there's without a doubt, Gig City at Tonsley has made a big difference to businesses are there with internet speeds 100 times faster. There are certainly some pockets and some suburbs where we would like to see that. Now that's private, it's not certainly just government. 5G is going to make some improvements there, but so it's fairly broad. But I think if we could start with those roads and rail, we'd be fairly happy.
You'd be a happy woman. And Mark, can I ask you, with your sort of international lens, is there a word of warning that you might give, or a word of advice you might give to South Australia as it embarks on this, era of infrastructure change?
Yeah, try to anticipate where you're going to be.
Yeah.
I think that's it's a hard thing. The minister talked about the low density, low demand, right? That is the bugaboo for almost every city. It's easy when you have a high density. If you're in Melbourne, it's not hard, or if you're Portland, it's not hard. You can have this great transit system. But what do you do when you're in a car-dependent, car-preferred space? And there's a lot of cities like that. But what happens is, and Austin was one of those. I keep coming back to Austin because I feel like you guys know Austin for some reason. But it is a car-dependent. They have a very atrophied public transit system. Now they reap what they sow. They are in trouble, and they are now reacting to and spending a lot more money on trying to solve the problem if they would have anticipated it. So that's all, is that it's hard to spend money and hoping that they come. I don't recommend that, but having a plan and a regional plan on what you're going to do on a phased approach if your population starts
And that
coming.
it's organic and adaptable.
Correct, and it's human-centered.
Yeah.
You know, it's again, it's the point you were making, is that, hey, I've got these people who want to come out to the wine country, but they can't figure out how to get to actually there unless they drive. It's trying to figure out what does the people want, and how do they want to move about your space.
Thank you for that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a wide-ranging discussion. Would you please thank our panel?
Yeah.